Thank you, Frederick, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I don't know where I should be standing. I think I stand here. No, not here. This is better. Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning in one of my favorite buildings of all time. Not certainly this edition, but across the courtyard. When Frederick contacted me about speaking here, I have to say I was puzzled as to why. Probably my area of focus is not what this conference has been about, but the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about how I approach the work and what our goals and aspirations as architects and designers are in the projects that we're working on, I began to find more and more linkages between that. So if you're expecting a scientific presentation, not going to be there. But I'm hoping that as I dive into my own personal design process and what influences it, and also what we're doing on some of the key recent projects, that you begin to see that a lot of the work that we're doing, at least with the projects, are to really deal with the conditions that our clients are facing today. And as we know, there are rapid changes happening around us, and they have direct impact on the way our clients want to build their buildings, the way they want to use the buildings, and ultimately the outcome that those buildings have for them. So as Frederick mentioned, before I get into that, just give you a kind of a visual tour of some of the work that we've done. I'm going to focus mostly on 4 projects, educational, research, and healthcare today, but our work ranges in scale from exhibit design to large cultural, institutional, public projects. They are global, so it allows us to, while we're dealing with universal issues of design, planning, and architecture, also begin to understand different cultures and the uniqueness about the culture and the context, and let those impact the work that we do elsewhere. So if we learn from one typology in one place, we're able to let that inform the work across the board. Most of our clients are leaders in their field, whether they're scientists, physicians, corporate CEOs, and they're all, interesting enough, are seeing their business and their practice evolve. And as a result, some of the old methodologies and processes that we have used as architects, or we were trained to use, are no longer addressing those issues. And I'm sure the architects among you are experiencing that. On a more personal level, Frederick asked me to talk about design process. Is it a conscious act? Is it a subconscious act? On a personal level, design is a very messy process for me. It's not linear. I constantly move back and forth between the imaginary world and the world of reality, between poetry to data and sciences, and between ethereal and things that are built. And this is not where I live one world and go to the other. It's constantly going back and forth. Drawing, sketching, and painting is my way. Even in this advanced age of technology and all kinds of digital tools, I still draw, but I draw on pads and tablets, and I can communicate with my team. But the drawings are the way that I explore. For every project, I begin sketching, and sometimes these sketches are related to the projects, but a lot of time are completely independent of the projects. I've been sketching for almost 40 plus years. For the last 34 years, I've been keeping these sketchbooks. Did an internship with Michael Graves in Princeton back in the 80s, and I went to his office, and he had this collection of burgundy sketchbooks, and he had kept them for decades. And I bought my first, and I bought 20 of them before they went out of circulation, and I found matching ones. So I'm in my 34th sketchbooks, and these are almost like diaries for me. Unlike most architects' sketchbooks where they have words and they have travel sketches. Mine are none of those. Occasionally you find words, but most of them, they just start. And they imagine these kind of places, these kind of words. They're all architectural or tectonic, one way or another. They're drawn by ballpoint pens or gel pens. When my daughter was 7 years old, she took me to a place. I said, I want gel pens. I said, what are those? And when I discovered them, I've been drawing with gel pens. I hope they don't go out of circulation. I don't know how to replace them. But there they start. And when I start, I don't know where I end up. But I discover relationships. Sometimes they actually are sort of depiction of the ordinary things that we see around us. For years, I was infatuated by potato chips. That these were really simple geometries. By the time you fried them, they created these incredible forms. And I have pages and pages of sketches of holding the potato chips and drawing them up and down and over. And eventually, these find their ways into the project. So when we were designing the Bollywood Museum in Mumbai, the idea of leher, which is this shawl that you find in all Indian Bollywood museums that kind of flows in the air, became the element that defined the roof and defined the spaces. And my potato chip sketches kind of find their way in the expression of the building. I was born in Iran and left Iran when I was 18 years old. Unfortunately, after I left, I didn't really focus on Islamic architecture. I embraced the Western culture, but there are memories that stay with us. There are things that are part of us. Growing up writing in Arabic alphabet, my hand naturally goes to drawing curves. It's very easy for me, and I used to say Zaha Hadid's work is because she also started probably writing in Arabic, and we know how to write those. Sometimes those memories of walking through the bazaars or experiencing the mosques find their way into the way I think of a space. These are some of the sketches I did for one of the projects I share with you, which is a research facility in Korea. And it began to inform the way the atrium space and the pattern of the walkways and the way the light penetrates through that and the shadows that it leaves on the floors were things that were partially tapped into the memory, or the way the contrast between the light and the way the light impacts the surfaces. It's been a sort of fascination I've had, and there are pages and pages and pages of drawings of imagining how light might come to the space, how light might inform surfaces, forms, and textures. And some of those led into the way we approach the Serenity Room in the Jacobs Medical Center right across the highway from here, which began with a sketch and then went through a series of analysis of models and computer analysis to create this space that's informed by light but is not distracted by what's beyond that. So these sketches have had direct and indirect influence. Sometimes there are years between where those studies were done and when they informed the project. So they have these lasting memories lasting impact on my memories and on the hand that draws them. So for me, this idea of conscious, subconscious sketch project goes through phases of, as I said, intuition, and then and these ideas stay with you, and it's incubated, and eventually, as we begin the project, whether it's designing the Serenity Room and thinking about the lights, we verify their validity to it, and eventually manifests itself into the projects. So that's the designer as a person. As we know, as Tom Main always said, architecture is a team sport, so it involves collaborators, and they bring their input, they bring their sort of influence on the project, but also our clients, also the time that we live in and what we do with our clients. So as I mentioned, this is a really exciting time for designers, because we're confronting these kind of new conditions. So forces such as technology, changes in the environment, globalization, and a number of other factors are starting to influence our work. Libraries, we used to go to libraries to study. Now we can access every written information that exists from our bedroom. So what is a library? Starbucks works better than most libraries in terms of engaging the students and the way they work. So we're starting to kind of think about how those are impacted. Our clients are realizing that when they used to build buildings that serve one function, that no longer works, because we're all collaborating. We're collaborating across disciplines, we're collaborating across multiple fields. So we're starting to sort of focus on what I've called blurring the boundaries, to begin to look at where certain things begin to overlap with others. Where a scientist and a physician collaborate. Is it in the laboratory, is it in the surgery room, or is it in between, or is it virtual? So when you begin to think about those, you have to think about the kind of spaces this impact. So as a result of that, we're starting to think of new typologies. And the next few projects that I share with you, as I mentioned, they're designed for leading institutions, whether they're education, research, or health. And I want to kind of show you how we've addressed each one of those projects differently. So this is Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus. Picture is a little old. A few years ago, we designed that laboratory on the right-hand side for Hoffman Woodward Institute. There's for the last decade or so, Buffalo has been going through a kind of a quiet revolution. They had a lot of people leave the city when the tire and the steel industry went out. A lot of the younger people left. Now they're trying to bring them back and trying to create a vibrant environment. And one of their entryways is around creating centers of excellence in science and medicine. So Buffalo Niagara campus has been on the leading edge of that. So this campus has research, has education, has incubators, has a hospital, all of that within the platform. This is the laboratory we designed, which the idea was by the leadership to make scientists collaborate. By nature, and I don't mean to offend any scientists here, they tend to come work with their collaborators and focus on their projects, and if they have to, they collaborate. So here the intention was to get them out of their labs and get them to collaborate. So the entire building was designed to take elements that encourages them to interact, put it in the atrium, move their offices away from the labs, and force them to cross. As this building was being completed, I was contacted by a neurosurgeon, Dr. Nick Hopkins, a star physician in Western New York and Canada. And he was very interested in what we were doing with Hopman. And he said, I want to reinvent the next hospital. I don't think as physicians we are behaving and working, operating the same way we've done for years. I used to, as a surgeon, go in, do the cut, do the work, and had my nurses, and now I rely on a computer technician. Now we map out the surgery, and the robot does the surgery. So as a surgeon, I need to collaborate with computer scientists. I need to collaborate with industry partners that make these tools and help discover new ways. And then if I'm going to do that, then I want to commercialize that. So his idea was to create a building where scientists, clinicians, engineers, educators all collide together. As it was the case in Buffalo, they built different buildings and they put bridges in between with the hope of collaboration. So this project started as a 80,000 square foot incubator, and it grew to a 500,000 square foot building, which you're seeing here in addition to Buffalo Hospital, with 3 different institutions coming together under one roof. So the idea of the building was, if this is the campus, you have concentrated the business in one corner, the research in another corner, medicine, University of Buffalo is somewhere else. But really, while maybe in the last century or a few decades they had their own fiefdom and they did their work, now they need to work together. So our idea of the building was to bring every component that's needed, but put it under one roof in one building. And then once you have this building, then you have to find ways to bring these disciplines together and force them to interact and collaborate and create new conditions. So ultimately, the building is not a hospital, laboratory, or an incubator. It's all of the above. So what do you call it? So we created this typology. There have been people coming from all over the world, I'm told by my client, to see this. And they're shocked that something like this happened. I don't think we can do it in California. Certainly with Oshpod and a few others, this is almost impossible. But I also described it as a club sandwich, that you have the different layers, and each one of them have their own unique taste. But when you bite on the whole thing, it's a new experience. And it's a new taste. So that was it. But when you do this, you have to design a highly flexible, adaptable chassis that allows for changes in the future. So we devised a regular grid of columns and floor to floor, which allows you to lay out laboratories, patient rooms, procedure floors, offices, and anything else. And you can change every floor. If eventually patients after procedures don't have to stay in a bed, you can turn that into a procedure room. So that became a highly flexible building. It's a 50,000 square feet of floors, but all the cores and permanent structures on one side, none of them would get in the way. And then the spaces that promote these collaborations are expressed in the buildings through those sort of bands that weave into highlighting the importance of collaboration in the building. And this is how this stacks. And you could see kind of the rooms and the spaces that we've carved out to allow for that to happen. And through this building had opened 5-6 years ago, and what we've heard, they've been able to recruit scientists. They've been able to recruit top-notch physicians that would not otherwise go to Buffalo from places such as UMass. And then the industry partners have actually set up shops here. Toshiba gave him $1 million equipment, 3D printing for various organs for free, because their engineers can be next to the surgeon. So when the surgeon discovers something, can go to the cafe, pull the engineering in and say, if you do this, this would work better. And so you have On top, you have University of Buffalo surgeons. With the push of a button, they land in the middle of the surgery. That's run by Kaleida Health. And then you have the engineering providers. So all kinds of spaces that allows for that collaboration to happen and remove those boundaries. So in the process, which was a critical need that a client had, we've been able to create new conditions which has led into new behaviors, things that otherwise would not have happened with 4 different buildings with bridges connecting them. And that's what I mean by when you confront a situation like this, you have to kind of discover new ways to do it. Just recently, we finished this 1 million square foot research and development facility for CJ Corporation in Korea. And this houses 3 of their disciplines, food, pharma, and bio. And they were occupying different buildings, different parts of Seoul. And the leadership felt that the way their business was competing on a global sense, that they needed to bring the resources under one roof into a building that promoted that kind of collaboration and removed and blurred those lines. So the idea of giving each one of these groups a highly flexible lab, but allowing common spaces, collaborative spaces of varying scale was the key to the success of the project. So the spaces, I call this kind of the town square. This is the central atrium space where each one of the lab wings have to go through in order to get to their labs. On the way to the labs, you have a wide range of open collaborative spaces. You pull in your collaborators, or you meet somebody and you sit down, and in the context of the whole building, you collaborate. And then spaces that are filled with light and access to landscape to enhance that experience. The feedback that we've gotten, this building opened a couple years ago, is that the productivity has gone up. People seem to be happier. They're actually staying in the building longer. And one of the businesses, I think it was their pharma, that was suffering, has all of a sudden turned a corner, and they're becoming more profitable. So I like to credit the building to that. I don't know if they did something else, but I'm sure our building had something to do. So creating laboratories where the clutter goes away, everything is on wheels, so you can pull the bench and reconfigure the workstation around collaborative spaces and not have to worry about clutter, worry about spaces that are fixed. This is a kind of typical lab. Nobody occupies the exterior wall, so the daylight is democratized and is accessible to all. And the sunscreen on the outside temper the light, glare, and heat on the building. The building also, the building envelope, besides performing kind of the environmental issues, it also reflects the way activities happen and the importance of collaboration. So the parts of the skin that opens up are where the collaborative spaces are, where we actually plan places for the scientists and others to come together. So the building exterior, much like the Gates Vascular Institute that I showed, celebrates the importance of that in their culture and in who they are. Access to nature, this is actually a natural planting. So there are sky gardens between each one of 2 pods or 2 petals, and the scientists, the glazing you see on the side are the labs, so you could actually step in here, especially in the winter of Seoul, and either enjoy the landscape, enjoy the view, or enjoy the conversation. So this one was designed around the water and the sound of the water and its impact on the productivity. The next project completed 2 years ago It's Lassonde Studios at University of Utah. This, on the paper, the brief asked for 400, I call heads on beds, student housing, and a 20,000 square foot, what they call the garage, which is a maker space for student entrepreneurs. We had two clients, even though it was the state of Utah and University of Utah. On one hand, we had the housing folks that just basically wanted to provide 1-2 bedroom rooms for the students. And on the other hand, we had Lassonde Institute, which is an entrepreneur institute funded by Pierre Lassonde, who is a billionaire, made his money in mining, graduated from University of Utah, is giving back. And they started a program to promote entrepreneurship among the students on the campus in conjunction with School of Business. And they had that program for 10 years. And then they said, okay, this is running and we're issuing these scholarships. The students are acting on their ideas. So they asked the students, what else do you want? And they said, we need a place where we can find cohorts, we can find collaborators, we can act on our ideas, we can prototype things, and then maybe be coached and take these ideas to the marketplace. Now, you should know that 80% of University of Utah graduates stay in Utah. So if you're actually able to promote entrepreneurship and keep these kids, and they form businesses, it helps the local economy. So Pierre Lassonde invested $15 million. State of Utah provided additional funds to create a 140,000 square foot building, which accommodated 400 rooms, or 400 beds, I should say, for what's called Lassonde Associates. These are kids that have to get accepted into the entrepreneur program, and they get to live in this building. When the building was completed, they had 400 rooms available, and they got over 1,500 applicants with a waiting list to get in the building. And then the ground floor is a 20,000 square foot maker space, basically, which not only caters to the 400, but it's a resource for the entire campus. So over 5,000 students get to use this. It's transparent, the door's open, you can walk in and you can use it. But when we started the project, everybody's idea was we're going to build some dorms and put it on this cool space or next to this cool space and hope for the best. We approached it by asking this question. And I think this has been discussed in this conference is, does your living environment contribute to you as a creative person, as an entrepreneur? And this is a question we asked them, and the answers were yes. Now, then for us was, how do we approach this? If we go the traditional route, we'll design a dorm, and we park it on top of a kind of a maker space or park it next to a maker space. We said, well, let's discover this. How do we discover it? The same way you ask your entrepreneurs that they want to test their new ideas, they prototype it. So let's prototype. And this was after we had finished GVI. We had gone through this process of discovery, but we didn't know that we were actually prototyping a new typology. So here we finally said, let's admit to it. We're trying to do this differently. And here are the pieces. And we said, when you say camera phone, is camera phone a camera duct tape on top of a phone? Or can we think of the camera phone like this? And when we think of it like this, look at how many other things come out of it. And unfortunately, as architects and designers, and I'm not trying to say that's bad, we rely on precedents. We learn from precedents, we build on precedents. But I'm more and more discovering that some of those bets are off. And yes, we could have created great dorms and great maker spaces. Maybe the project would not have gone to the potential that it had. So we embarked on the process, and we said, if we rely on on program, which is really verbs, a classroom, a student room. All of these come with baggage. When I say classroom, we all imagine a classroom, right? We have chairs, we have the screen, sometimes the chairs move, sometimes they're sideways, or sometimes around the table. So let's move away from the nouns, and let's get into activities. We can think about what many things could happen in this building. So we said, we're not going to program the building. Let's discover the building and then write the program to it. Keep in mind that the budget is fixed, the size of the building is fixed, but everything in between can be variable. So we said, here are the things that happen in the living component of this project and the making component, and then let's think of all kinds of activities. So we conducted surveys, not only with the client representatives, but also with the students. We sent out surveys online, and 30% of the students responded, but that was better than not getting any responses back. And then we developed an in-house parametric model to take all the activities that the students and the faculty and the mentors had in mind, and we began to sort of organize them on a number of levels. So our parametric model had different variables. Besides what was part of the living, what was part of the making, it was what are communals? What's the degree of public space to highly private space? So if I'm in bed, it's very private, hopefully, most of the time. But if I am in a maker space in the large, what was dubbed as garage, I'm with a lot of people. If I'm dining by myself or if I'm dining in a group. And then we started populating that model with all the sort of input we had gotten from the survey and our own input. And we began to look at affinities and proximities and clustering those activities. And then out of those, we came up with, and I'm skipping a whole lot of steps in between, 3 types of conditions. And one we called the typical apartments, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, loft for 4 students that potentially are part of a business that they've put together. They live and make in the space, to the studios, which was for 20 students in one place. So you could see that in one model, the spaces are separated and compartmentalized, to the other model where it all merges together in one space. And this was truly an experiment, which is credit to University of Utah and Lausanne to let us go. And this is without having a program. We haven't written the program yet. So as a result of that, we looked at a spectrum of prototype from what we call a traditional model, proximate and connected, where the 2 functions are separated, to bring in some of the maker into the living in the fused model, to the loft, which we said a lot of industrial buildings used to be industrial manufacturing, then they became artist lofts, and then they became ad agencies if they're Soho. So that's valid, and it's been around for centuries. Why aren't we building that on campuses? And then to the studio, but that really was the idea of Steve Jobs lived in his garage. So you could actually, if you're so fascinated by the work and you're working on it 24/7, then you're living in there. So there is no line between your living and making environments. So our prototype, ultimately, we extracted the DNA of the prototype, which is written down below. Obviously, flexibility and agility was important. So unlike many housing projects that are built in wood, this is concrete. Columns are regular. They're high floors, so they allow for flexibility. So at any point, they can change a model if it fails. If they don't want to be in studios and 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms sell better, let's reconfigure it. We combine freshmen with upperclassmen. That's an absolute no-no on campuses. Freshmen have their own dorms and floors, upperclassmen. And we said, if you're an entrepreneur, and you're an 18-year-old with the idea, and your cohorts are 20-year-olds, should we separate them? Shouldn't they be on the same floor? So that's another radical discovery in the process. So these are, and then mixing ages and genders on the floor, because we say creative process doesn't recognize hours, doesn't recognize days, doesn't recognize gender. It's all blurred together. And then after that, we wrote the program, and we embarked on transforming the prototype, which is on the upper left, to a site-adapt, context-sensitive building. So at the end of the day, we still have to deal with how the building relates to the campus, how it relates to the culture of the place, how it responds to the forces of nature. So without compromising the discovery of the prototype. So it goes from that to that, and then here's a typical plan. So you have 4 wings, as the prototype had. On the upper side, you have, for freshmen, you have 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms. But in this case, their TV lounges are maker space. So it's not a bunch of sofas that you sit and watch TV. This is a place you could actually work on your projects and on your discoveries. The other 2 wings, the longer one, are lofts for 4 students. Hopefully they're part of the same company and the team, and they're working day and night. They make their food, they live in it. And then the square portion is kind of a radical departure. We put in 18 kids in sleeping pods, and they live together in one space. You go tell your daughter that, or your son. Interesting enough, the housing folks were nervous as hell. When we showed them this, they said there's no way any parents would want their kids in there. The 1,400 students that applied, their first choice were the sleeping pods. To this day is their first choice. And basically, each get an 8x8x8 sleeping pod with a bed, a built-in TV, storage for their personal belongings, but it's small enough that it's forced them to go outside. But because they're living with 18, 20 people, they sometimes need time, private time to themselves, so that gives them the privacy. And again, so this is the prefabricated sleeping pod that can be brought in, dropped in, and has privacy, has acoustics, air, built-in TV, which everybody loved, because the other rooms don't get built-in TV, so maybe that's the reason. I have no idea. And the ground floor is the garage. You can prototype, you can borrow tools, you can reconfigure it for TED Talks, for competitions, and it's open and it's connected to the campus. As a result of the discovery, collectively we decided to put the building smack in the heart of the campus, which was one of 4 sites they were considering. The other sites were in the corner of the campus, part of the housing. And by the time we were done with the prototyping, the housing folks said, well, this is not your typical student housing. We've actually created a building that is almost like a library or a student union that belongs to the entire campus. So everybody opted to put it along the busiest pedestrian walkway on the campus. And I'm told that faculty from other disciplines go there, grab coffee or at the cafe, and they hang out. There is a shop. So if you're working on a prototype, you have access to these tools as well as 3D printing, and you could push it outside. So again, think about the kind of students these are. These are not necessarily outgoing students. These are those who are very intense, work, they need collaborators. So the building, the way it's designed, it allows them to get out of their shell, allows them to find collaborators and partners, and it provides them with mentorship and the tools to be able to be successful business people. This is a typical lounge on a residential floor, very much like there was an article in Fast Company compared it to like a tech campus. Here, the type of furniture is what you would find at home. very comfortable. It could be abused. None of this is meant to be institutional and fixed, and the students have taken ownership. I've heard that they actually, one time, the director of Lassana Institute went in and found some kid had disassembled his bike in their living environment, and he was testing things to it. When was the last time they were allowed to do that in the dorm? So it's impacted their behavior, and it's impacted the way they look at their living environments. The building is clad in copper. The same way that we see this as a dynamic organism, the building also is going to change as time goes by. This is the most rewarding thing I've ever seen in 20 some odd years of practicing design. This was their first annual business report that came out. 2016 is the first year the building was in operation. So I know as scientists, you're interested in matrix. This is a matrix. So startup companies, and the thing to look at, the light gray is faculty startup, the light orange. The darker orange is student startup. We didn't do anything for the faculty, unfortunately, even though some of them asked me, are there spaces for faculty here? The student startup companies have doubled, if not quadrupled, tripled. Scholarship awarded. These are scholarships that come from companies to students that are having an idea and are trying to commercialize those. That's the impact. And as I mentioned, Lassana Institute has been in operation since 2002. It was only in 2016 and 17 where all of a sudden the matrix started to jack up. Program participation, that the amount of students that are now part of this program, that are active, that are engaged with the building has been amazing. So we use similar kind of process on a project that's under construction in Pasadena. We designed the first school of medicine for Kaiser Permanente. So Kaiser Permanente is training their own doctors. And they had a 6 months, 7 months of visioning to imagine the doctor of future for Kaiser. They're not interested in creating superstar doctors. They're interested in creating mentors, collaborators, those who would teach you how to live healthy, eat healthy, and the egos are checked at the door. And there is a whole slew of vision conversation. So we said, this is your first medical school, and you're different than any academic institution. In fact, you're not an academic institution. So there is an opportunity to invent the next medical school. Now, they don't want me to present these to public, so I'm just showing you a few slides. You'll have to wait till the building is completed. But in our prototyping process, we said, traditionally, schools train doctors. The doctors go out to the world. They practice. They discover things. They write papers. They lecture. And it impacts, after a few years, it impacts the education. You're different. You have an ecosystem. You have hospitals, you have medical centers, you have community centers. So when you train your doctor, that doctor can, in fact, come immediately back to the school and impact the education. So that sort of feedback loop between education and practice is immediate. So really, we're not designing a medical school, we're actually designing a laboratory. So again, we could have taken a program that was given to us and designed a 21st century medical school, but that would not have been what Kaiser wanted to do. So through this process, we actually were able to capture data, which I can't show to you, to compare that their program was inaccurate and would not reflect their vision. Actually, the dean got up in the middle of the presentation and said, oh my God, we were going the wrong direction. So we were able to recalibrate the program and create what came out of it, I call an and space. We said, your doctors, this is the way you see your doctor. He or she is doing all of this stuff. Why are you building a traditional medical school, which is really designed for a different type of doctors? Even though they read the same textbooks and they use the same information, what you're trying, the outcome, the behavior of these doctors and the way they engage their community and their students is different. So why are you building? So as a result, again, we can't change the size of the building. We can't change the budget. So we had to recalibrate the program and think of spaces with multiple functions and multiple dimensions that allowed, the different types of behaviors. And it was really about altering the behavior. We're not altering the curriculum. We're not changing the books. We're not changing the information. We're altering the behavior. So as a result, we're saying that if the school is going to have this kind of feedback loop back to the community and the medical ecosystem of Kaiser, then the doctor at the center of it with the multiple things that he or she is doing we need to create an environment. So I'll just share with you one space where the walls are removed, that activities are simultaneous, and you can go from meditating to reading to collaborating to mentoring to teaching. There is a meditation room on the roof. There is a garden on the roof. At one point, we had a vegetable garden, which may come back. We had to value engineer it, but it's engineered to allow for vegetable garden on the roof. So unlike one of the aspects of this was, unlike most medical schools that are part of the campus, this building is a campus by itself because it doesn't belong to any. So a lot of those student life aspects of a student life had to be accommodated in a singular building as opposed to a campus. Finally, a project 5 minutes away from here is a Jacobs Medical Center. We completed that last year. If you go online and review the feedback from patients and family and administrators, it's been amazing. Most hospitals, when they open, their review go up and then takes a nosedive. This has been continuing up, so we're waiting for a couple of years to be able to get the data and then sort of prove some of the things we're doing. The unique thing about this, it was my first hospital. In fact, when I went to the interview, we had just completed the Price Center on the campus, which was a huge success. And the C-suite asked me, well, we like your work. There's no hospital in it. Have you ever done a hospital? And I said, no. But I was surrounded by a number of my colleagues who are specialists in healthcare, and that's unique about the studio and its relationship to Canon Design as a firm. So they were comfortable enough to hire us, and they said, we're curious to see what you would do with your first hospital. And my point to them was, I can come to this with a fresh set of eyes, and I don't see this as a hospital. I see this as a piece of architecture. I see this as a space where we're trying to contribute to the healing process. We're trying to create a building that takes advantage of this fabulous context that we have. It's above a canyon, just across from the freeway, views of the ocean and the canyon. And we're trying to create a space that promotes productivity for those caregivers that are there for long hours or for the physicians. So the building ultimately was a patient-centric building, and it was an intersection of these three elements. Environment, as I said, fabulous place. Daylight, landscape, gardens, as a active participant in the act of healing. Technology, you can't live without it today. They use some of the most advanced technologies in clinical care here in this building. And then certainly, how do we design the building to make sure that the caregivers do what they do best, and they could do it better. The process, and again, as somebody who had never done it before, there were a lot of collaborators, and it was a very intense, interactive, and engaged process, a process of learning for us and process of challenging those who thought they had the answer. And those were my colleagues, healthcare planners and architects. We do it this way. We have done it this way. And then we said, can we do it this way? And what happens if we did it this way? Collaborating with the clients. Some of our design team actually participated observing surgery just to see how the surgeons and the nurses and the support interact with the space and learn from it. And we did 3D mock-ups. So what you see on the far right hand, those are foam full-scale models. So we modeled a patient room and had the nurses and the doctors test drive them and give us their feedback. Is this in the right place? And is this wide enough? Is this big enough? And then the same thing for some of the critical spaces were all done and then tested along the way. The solution just didn't come easily. I was sketching simultaneously with the team exploring different configurations. So we probably had close to 60 models. The first presentation we had with the C-suite, we were able to cover a long table like this with those little 3D print models that explored different configurations for different reasons. I had a colleague who said, Mehrdad, you do like 50, 60 different schemes. Most projects have really 3 viable schemes, and the client can take one. And there's probably some truth to that, but you discover new things. You discover conditions in each one of these that informs the ultimate solution. So we let the team go and sometimes explore things that at first glance, you won't have a round hospital. But that round hospital teaches us how much windows we need and what happens to the circulation when that happens. So these were done through various configuration. The building itself is 3 hospitals in one. The lower 3-4 floors is advanced surgery, 3 floors of cancer, and then women and infant. And this building grew along the process. For those of you who live locally, you probably read articles that this building budget has gone up. Well, it was only to the 6th floor till we changed CEO. And he said, well, I like to put women and infant on it, so the building grew, so did the budget. And they were interested in expressing each one of the hospitals. Obviously, we weren't going to have 3 buildings stacked on top of each other, but their delineation of that. One of the things that was pretty important to us was, as I mentioned, how do we engage not only the campus, but also the environment itself? And we've dubbed this as vertical garden hospital. So there is a therapeutic garden down below. The plants have grown. The walk through the garden. As the building rises, besides floor-to-ceiling glazing for every patient room, you have series of gardens at different intervals from the left to the right, and then rising up to a rooftop garden that allows family and some patients, not all patients are allowed, to get out, to be outside. And if you have a loved one there, you're not locked up in the room. There is actually a family room as well as access to the outside. And then how the building engages its environment. So this is kind of some of the data on how many beds we have and the kind of services we have. But the plan was about trying to maximize visibility, respond to the orientation so we can capture daylight, we can make the glare go away and make the experience of the rooms pleasant for the patient as well as the family. And then ultimately the shape provides the privacy and the engagement with the context. It's not an arbitrary plan. It's actually built on proven models of hospital planning. So this is sort of a typical plan. Garden at the public spaces. Every corridor leads into the tip of the tower, which are family rooms. So you're a few minutes away from where your loved one is, and you can get away, do your work on the computer, enjoy the view, be in a quiet space, and then back. The way the corridors are designed, they maximize sight lines for the nurses, and they, they ease movement through the building. One feedback we got was some of the nurses said, when we walk through this, we feel like we're flowing in the space. And I said, yeah, as human beings, we don't turn in right angles. We tend to walk in a more organic way. So this building, somebody said it hugs you as you walk through. Some say it flows. So some of the corners, you'd see all the corners are rounded for ease of movement, ease of movement of goods and people in the building, and then maximizing landscape. So that's the top floor for women and infant that has even a walled garden where you can step out. This is the kind of floors where patients, after they give birth, they can actually walk around and be outside, unlike the cancer patients on floors below. The connection to the canyon was pretty important. Again, maximizing daylighting. The building you see on the right-hand side is the central utility plant, which most of the time is this monster mechanical thing. We embedded it in the canyon, and the roof kind of rises out of the landscape, and from the hospital, all you see would be a green roof and not a massive building, and then the canyon beyond that. The shadows you see on the facade are sunscreen, so there was an extensive parametric modeling of the sun and the frit patterns on the glass to maximize view and minimize glare. And wherever the sun was deep, we folded the glass in, and wherever it wasn't, we added sunscreens. Landscape, as I mentioned, has been pretty important. These are a couple of courtyards. A couple of courtyards that are carved in the diagnostic and treatment floor, where all the surgery rooms are. So as surgeons and nurses, they can actually step outside and be in the courtyard. So the lower level is accessible to public, and then beyond that is a courtyard which is for the surgeons and the nurses, and this kind of shows the relationship to the existing hospital. This is meant to transform the existing community hospital into a academic medical center. Rooftop gardens. We were forced to put this 6-foot glass away from the edge. We were told we don't do terraces on hospitals, people commit suicide. So we said, let's do terraces, but let's find a way for people to make it very difficult for them to commit suicide. So we designed this glass wall, sits away about 5-6 feet, which we did not like because it was space that we had to give up. But we were able to create these gardens at various floors on the building. The interior maximizes daylighting. We avoided coloring as a way of wayfinding. We used daylight, landscape, garden, and then this light fixture that is kind of an element that happens in all public spaces. So it defines the space. It allows you to kind of flow into the space. So this is the lobby on the ground floor with the surgery on the second floor, so easy access to the second floor. Again, subtle light surfaces, quiet. We've been told that the productivity has gone up. A lot of the nurses, I even heard, and I hope this doesn't end, they said, we dress better in this building, whatever that means. The mood is better. The family feels that some of the comments that it feels like a luxury hospital, a luxury hotel, that the experience has been outside of the stress has been quite pleasant. I showed you the chapel on the ground floor. This is Serenity Room. It's actually not a chapel. The windows behind this look to the loading dock. So this was the only place we could put the Serenity Room, but it gave us the ability to bring light in a mysterious way and in a contemplative way. It has a focal point with fractures of glass in it, and it's a space that's used by family as well as those who work there. So there are different ways of the way light comes in, through direct windows, playing with the patterns of the glass and the sunscreens to give kind of a dynamic quality to the space, so it's not always the same when you're there. And layering of the landscape and the views. This is a typical waiting area. Again, light colors, simple forms, lack of clutter. Even the surgery room has windows, so what you see on the upper side and the lower side, on the right-hand side, are clerestory windows that bring daylight, and the surgeons say for the first time, when we're in the surgery for 8 hours, we know what time of the day it is. 150 pieces of art that was curated by the museum and the Jacobs family by some of the most well-known artists. Therapeutic art, that was kind of the focus of the pieces, accessible to all, whether it's in the courtyard or the public spaces. Family room at the end of the spaces, the corridors, typical floor. We were touring some folks through this, and they said, are there any patients in the rooms? And we said, yes, it's packed. They go, it's very quiet. It's the most quiet hospital we've been in. And part of it has to do with the technology, has to do with the planning, has to do with a number of factors. And, and with the patient room, we said, a lot of hospitals are trying to do hospitality type rooms, and they add texture and color and everything else. But then the clinical things that needed there ruined the whole thing. So let's create a piece of furniture in blue, which is highly flexible, adaptable, and all of the things you need to care, it's in it, and then we slip that into a hotel room. So the result is this. That head wall actually won an award for product design a couple of years ago. Roof garden, all of the amenities in the wall. The beds are tilted for the views. I heard last night we have sofas in the patient rooms. And we also have views of the gardens, and the windows go down. Most hospitals stop the window at the sill. We said if you're horizontal on the bed, a sill height window doesn't give you anything, especially if the canyon is down there. And then this is the birthing room. If you give in natural birth, this is the kind of room you could use. So ultimately, the collection of projects I wanted to share with you is to sort of show the designer as an individual and the world of his that is disconnected from the realities of the project, program, client, site, and has an exploration on its own. And then it intersects with the realities, and those realities are changing, and then finding those kind of new solutions to deal with these realities now. So with that, I'll open it to questions. I was given 5-minute warning 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes?
let's take two. So up there.
Thank you for a highly inspiring presentation. I had heard about you, and I must say I'm a little jealous, and I'm also a little hungry for chips and club sandwich. I have one quick question. In your first project that you were presenting, you talked about the post-occupancy comments that came back to you, and happiness was part of it. Can you give me like one or two elements in that design that provided that happiness?
Yeah, it's interesting. And these are completely unsolicited comments. I mean, then they don't, a lot of times they don't show up in these post-occupancy reviews we have. It comes in conversations. We did a federal courthouse in Las Vegas, and when I was walking the building 2 years after with the judge, he said, you know, I think my administrative support are more collaborative in this building. They complain less, and they're happier. And if you saw the old courthouse they were in, I can imagine why. So I think part of it has to do with people being in an older building, and then they move into the other. But the other part, most of the time, the comments I've heard, is this notion of a building that's filled with daylight, has a direct relationship with landscape and outdoor, whether it's in Buffalo, in the cold climate of Buffalo, or in Southern California, in La Jolla. That seems to be, as human beings, we love daylight, and it's part of what gives us energy, gives us. And when that is introduced in buildings, especially in spaces where you don't expect it. If you visit many hospitals, because of the enormous size of the bed tower floors, nurses never see daylight unless they go through the patient rooms. And the patients, God forbid, some hospitals put the bathrooms on the outside, which limits the amount of windows. So here, we have wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling glazing. The wall between the room and the corridor has a side light, so the nurse can actually see the patient. But each direction that you look in the corridors, we have glass doors looking through the family rooms. In any other plan, that would have been occupied by something else, but we kept it open. So these are intentional planning strategies that has direct impact, and it results in productivity, results in better moods in people, and I think you probably in some of the presentations have talked about that. And we see that. We hear it a couple of years after the building is open. So I think it's part of those, bringing those in the planning process and embedding them in the design, and a lot of it has to do with my own interest in daylight, and you saw the sketches of how we can harvest that and how we can let that inform the architecture.
Okay, another question? Let's go in the back. We'll try three.
Thank you again. This is amazing. I'm just wondering, you talked a lot about designing for gathering places. Have you put together any kind of research insights or design principles that might sort of say, here's the taxonomy of what those places need to have in order for us to actually bring the gathering of people together?
Excuse me. Nothing in form of a white paper, but for every project that we've tested an idea, we've gone back and we've done some post-occupancy evaluation to see how that works. With Utah, I think we kind of pushed that to engage the technology. The parametric modeling that we did there, I thought, was a leap for us. You know, I wouldn't say that it was the most streamlined and effective way, but we learned quite a bit about how you take a feedback from the users, future users or current participants, and you put that in the context of what you've learned. So a lot of the analysis, probably 1/3 was given by the students and the housing folks and the Lassonde folks, 2/3 of it was based on our own investigation. So we do have some data, but it's not in the form of a white paper that can be published.
All right, just one more. And a short one, please. In front.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I don't want you to reveal your secret, but I've been interested so much in the design process and how the architect comes up with ideas. So if you can speak a little more about what is the effect of your mode through all the phases of the design process? What is the effect of the mode? What do you do to set up your mind to be creative? Okay. Since this is about connecting, I'll be honest, I've been trying to explore since I was in my schooling years on how I can come up with authentic ideas that can really adapt what's the solution are for. So, and this is actually the reason why I'm here. I don't want to make it about myself, but I wanted to make it more universal on how you come up with these universal ideas.
So I would say that no matter what, a design process is highly personalized. Every designer works differently, uses the tools that he or she has differently. I was trying to sort of portray how I work. And as I said, it's not a linear process. It's not like step one, we do this, step two, I do that. On a personal level, it's very intuitive, but from the practice side of it, we do have a methodology. We do have the process of researching and getting to know everything we know about the past, the present, and future of that client, the site, the typology, the program that we're dealing, and letting that inform our decision, not necessarily repeating it, but letting it inform the future. The iterative process of design, whether it's using models or using parametric investigation, to generate as many ideas as we can to discover all dimensions of the project, and sharing that with the client and letting that information inform the process, and then going through the process of elimination. And once you have the idea, again, go through another set of iteration till you reach your own idea. But so that process, you know, a lot of architects have similar kind of process. The personal side is always different. One thing that I truly believe is that you have to work your creative muscle. You know, as athletes, you could be the best basketball player. I'm a big fan of basketball. But if you sit in front of the TV day in and day out, you're not. And if the coach calls you and you're on the court and you haven't worked the muscles and your techniques, you're going to be rusty and you're not going to be as good. So I always, in the studio, I share with my young designers my sketchbooks. I said, look, even at this age and where I am constantly drawing. I am constantly developing that muscle because I don't want that muscle, and a lot of it, and I know when a couple of weeks have gone by and I've had a lot of deadlines or whatever, haven't drawn, my hand doesn't flow as comfortably as it did 2 weeks before that. So I think as a creative person, while there may be processes, it's about you finding what is it that you have to do to kind of continue to build those muscles, build those creativities. One last comment, when we hire young designers in the studio, we're constantly moving, especially if they're fresh out of college. We don't assign them to long-term projects, and they get frustrated. You know, after 2 weeks, they're on to another project. After 3 weeks, and after a year, they're working on a 1 month long project. And it's very frustrating for them because their faculty say, go to the office, work on a project from beginning till the end, and you learn how architecture is done. And I tell them, not going to happen here because our projects take 6 years. And you'll be of no use to me by the end of that 6 years. I said, the longest project you had in college was maybe 5 weeks. And if you did a thesis, it was 11 weeks or 16 weeks. If I assign you to a year-long project, your muscles, your creative muscles, unless you're doing them on the side, is no use. So you have to deal with how you grow that at various stages of your career. And as you advance, we tend to take on more responsibilities, which involves less with creative endeavors and more with the business and client relationships. So unless you have this extracurriculum activity, those muscles tend to get lazy.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Well, let's recognize John.